Welcome, Patrick Mesterton, to Cash and Soul. Patrick, you're a long-time entrepreneur and maybe mostly famous for co-founding Epicenter, which is one of the biggest centers for startups and kind of startup community and so forth. So I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Excited to get to know you. We were just discussing, we have met somewhere, but we're not really sure where.
Yeah, very familiar face. And I'm sure we'll soon sort of recall where we first interacted.
Exactly. So, and this, the podcast, as I said, is about cash and soul and a meeting between the spiritual and the business world. And I'd like to start off with, what is spirituality for you?
I think spirituality is sort of a connection to a deeper sense of who you are as a person. Sort of a sense of belonging, a sort of a sense of understanding of what's really important to you as an individual and a person. That's spirituality to me.
Yeah, that's very... and how, for you, how was that developed in your life? When did you start getting interested, and what happened to develop you?
Yeah, I think I had a very sort of traditional upbringing and background. You know, like most Swedes, you go to sort of a confirmation, whatever you call that, sort of in English when you're there. And so you had part of the spiritual journey. I also went to Sunday school when I was a kid, etc. So my family is not religious at all, but sort of I had a few tastes of that. And then as I got older and sort of started developing, and you start seeing things in other perspectives, you start thinking a little bit more about, you know, the bigger sense and the why, etc. And then I've come across mindfulness, and I've had a sort of a chance to sort of work a little bit more with breath work and sort of meditation and those type of things that have also guided me a little bit sort of on the path of where I am today.
What I've seen with a lot of people is that this kind of the development of your spiritual is often happening in kind of spurts, and different things happen in your life. And for me, it was actually my big spiritual moment was when I was sitting on my mother's deathbed, and suddenly I got this really strong connection to her, and by that time I hadn't cried for 25 years, and I came out and just cried, and that was started my whole spiritual journey. Before that, I was completely uninterested or wasn't aware of that space, let's say. But for you, I mean, were there any moments like that you felt kind of elevated your interest or shifted you somewhere in your life?
Yeah, I think on a personal level, I mean, I think we've all experienced, as you say, life-changing moments in that sense. And one of the biggest ones for me was obviously becoming a father. And I think that sort of put things also a little bit in a different perspective, and you have a higher sense and a higher meaning. And that made me also think and contemplate a little bit more about, you know, the universe and what's sort of around you. And I think I haven't sort of felt that. I was very much into the machinery way of sort of living and you know, doing everything very sequential and stuff like that, where that became sort of a moment to sort of think a little bit more about that and get another sense and feeling around things than I maybe had before.
And how old were you when you became a father?
I was 32.
32, okay.
Yeah, so it's sort of, I don't know, mid-life in that sense when most parents became. And I think that became a very sort of changing moment for me.
And what happened then? What happened? How were you before and after?
No, but I think I was sort of quite selfish and a little bit more sort of self-aware around things. I wasn't taking in everything sort of around me, maybe in, you know, in the sense of understanding that there's something much bigger out there than sort of just the me in that sense. And I think by having someone that you have to take care of, that you need to shield and sort of, you know, cover for and nurture in that sense, that sort of opened up sort of different feelings and sort of different aspects of my life when that happened.
Were there other moments in your life, you becoming a father, and were there other moments that kind of made a shift for you?
Yeah, but I think like you sort of develop, of course, a shell and you sort of grow as a person. And then you start questioning also your own self and your upbringing and the relationships and the stuff that you had. And I also had a a relationship that didn't work out really well when I was maybe in my between 29 and 30 and something like that, that also allowed me to start questioning a lot about who am I, what am I doing, who am I as a person, you know, what do I offer the next man and sort of the world around me. So that also sort of opened up, you know, a way to think differently around me as an individual.
Exactly. So so I guess so that was that the mother of the child?
No, that was actually before. So after we broke up, then I met now the mother of my child, and we had a couple of years until we started building a family and settling in, and of course that gave me a lot of growth in that period as well, from what I had before and to what I was going into.
Interesting, yeah. Now, becoming a father is, of course, one of the most spiritual experiences there are.
Yeah.
I just, that was a profound moment for me as well. You talked about kind of mindfulness and different type of retreats and things that you've been to. What are there any things of those things that have really changed for you as well, that really were experiences that really kind of molded you in one?
Yeah, I think so. I was in, what was this year, maybe 2006, maybe something like that. I went to silent retreat in Riga for, you know, two different spells.
Okay.
You weren't allowed to speak at all, and you were there for, I think, 4 consecutive days the first time, and then 4 consecutive days, you know, the last time. And going from a quite stressful world where you're, you know, always on the go, being a manager, having people reporting to you, you know, into that sort of wheel of sort of, you know, day-to-day task, taking that full perspective out, being silent, spending time with other people, but not talking to them, and then having sort of deep, profound conversations with each other was sort of quite changing for me, at least at that time.
Yeah.
And that also allowed me to open up and be vulnerable. And I remember we had conversation about, we were throwing things into the fire of things that you want to get rid out of your life. And that came with a lot of tears and a lot of pain as well, because then you reflect on your childhood and other things that you've carried with you, that you were able to sort of, I would say, at least enlighten, and some of them also let go in you know, in that process.
And what were the things you needed to get rid of? What things were you throwing into the fire?
No, but I think the sort of level of always having to, perform has been a thing, you know, always show that you're sort of good at things, because I had a pretty tough childhood growing up with a mother that was quite abusive and, you know, things like that. So I didn't have, I think, the best confidence at the time. So always having to sort of perform to show your sort of dutiness and willingness somehow, and feeling then safe with other people, and then being able to sort of let go of those bad memories was you know, quite a big thing for me at the time.
Oh, that's a huge thing. I mean, I can super relate to, because I also had an abusive mother who was, you know, mentally ill, and one of those people where you kind of have to walk around on eggshells all the time. And yeah, my sister described it. The way she put down her bag when she came home, you could see what kind of mood she was in, right? So you could never feel safe. And I think it's the same thing for me there, that I always felt that I needed to be performed to be loved, right? And I think the mother, especially for men, I think the mother is so...
Yeah, you're very vulnerable when you're small, and, you know, the person that you should feel the closest to and that are to protect you. And if they sort of, you know, I've been thinking a lot about that afterwards. I don't think anyone is doing anything by sort of harm or intent, but things might come back absolutely the wrong way, and it has to do with their own childhood and upbringing and sort of emotions. And I think that she wasn't happy in her life and the way that she had a structure with my father, and that came out then the wrong way towards us. And they came from a very different generation, and she's also from a different country where, you know, when kids do not act the way that the parents accept, then you get spanked, basically. And being then a little bit vulnerable in that sense wasn't very, you know, I didn't have a positive influence on me, at least when I was a kid. So I became quite hard and, you know, quite shut down and things like that. So part of me was releasing a lot of that happened during that phase when we went to Riga. Wow.
No, I can really relate to that, what you're saying about I was wondering with your mother, have you been able to forgive her?
I have. What I've done, and I think I've spoken quite a lot about that lately, actually, with people, is I think that
Is she alive? Sorry, is she alive?
Yeah, she's alive,
Yeah.
and we have a really good relationship in that
Right.
sense. But what I think is important, and I emphasize that when I speak to friends, is that I think you have to make sort of a closure. You have to, make ends meet somehow with your parents. And I confronted both my mom and my dad and talked to them about my experience. So not blaming anyone, but this is what I felt. This is what I wonder. How could this be? How can you put someone through some of these things that we have experienced? Because I think that's extremely important to sort of to make a step forwards and sort of to come out of that. And I've had that conversation. I think that was extremely painful for her. I think that she broke down and cried, and was I really that bad, and did all of these things happen? But afterwards, when you've had a chance at least to say that, and you know that it's in the open, and you've confronted someone about your experiences, you feel, 20 pounds lighter, and you feel that you at least have something sort of to move on. And then the other conversation with my dad is, why didn't you protect us then? And how come you, because he immediately, when my parents divorced and separated in the mid-80s, he got a new family the same day.
Wow.
And for me and my brother,
it felt like
it was terrible, because I was in the midst of my sort of teens, and you'd had a very turbulent upbringing, and you said, now it's just me, dad, and my brother, and let's just the three of us sort of build a new foundation around us.
So you kind of got rid of your mother in one way, or?
Yeah, and so what happened? My parents divorced, and my mother moved to another apartment, and we, as we were in our teens, we decided to stay with our dad in the place where we grew up. And also because we felt safer, and everything was sort of more calm and peaceful there. But what my dad did, because he was so afraid that he couldn't take care of two sons by himself, and he had work and things like that, and he felt he couldn't, handle sort of the day-to-day things, that he got a new family basically a week after my mother moved out.
Wow.
And for us then, when someone basically takes over your home, no criticism to that family at all. I'm sure that they sort of really loved him, but you became alienated in your own home at a very early age, when the only thing you were looking for was to have some comfort and
in connection with your dad.
Exactly, and get that sorted. So I've spoken to him about that. That was my sort of talk with him as well. But Dad, how could you make such a decision when we just asked you to sort of spend some time with us and sort of rebalance everything and get everybody sort of grounded and safe again? And he's like, yeah, but I did this because I thought that this was the best. I never did that with harm or intent. And yes, maybe I should have protected you a lot more during your early days, but two parents in the 70s working really hard, trying to make ends meet. It's difficult also for them to sort of. So I don't put any blame on it. It's just the fact that's happened.
But it's a beautiful thing that you could confront them with that and then move on.
Yeah,
that's a really
and you still live with it, so you process things obviously. But I think it's important that you try to be open and fair about this. I think that's the first step of healing and sort of growing, is that you need to sort of be open about these things.
Yeah, absolutely, and how have these kind of traumas that you have from your childhood, how have they kind of affected your life going forward? And but I think they manifest, of course, in other relationships. So I was together with someone for 24 years, and we never married because I was afraid of that, because I was afraid of divorce. You probably stay too long in relationships because you're afraid of change, and you don't want to upset your children because you don't want them to go through maybe what you did. So I think there's a lot of patterns in these things when they happen. Yeah.
And it's easy to be aware of them when you speak around them like this, but you sort of confronting some of these things in your daily life, when you start making, I wouldn't say the same mistakes, but you sort of follow a path of something that you've learned and that you've experienced yourself for many years. I think it's hard to change.
It really is. I mean, my mother, for example, she never told us anything about her childhood. So I didn't know anything about, what she experienced and even on her deathbed, I tried to kind of get her to talk about, how was your childhood. But then a couple of weeks after she died, we got this letter from one of her friends that told this story about her being together with my grandfather at the lake, and she did something he didn't like, and he just took her head and pushed it under the water and held her down there. And that was like, wow, what kind of things she had  and she gave something better to us, at least, And that was, and And I actually had even I wasn't able, like you, to talk to my mother really, because my own shift happened because of her death in a way, because of confronting that. So, but I actually went to her grave at one point and said, I forgive you. And that was really healing. And I felt also this generational pain that she got it from her parents,
of course,
gave it to me, and now in one way I don't have to give that thing to my sons and my daughter, at least. So it's really interesting with that generation.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think, again, of course, you can talk about environment, you can talk about your experience, etc. But somewhere inside you, talking about spirituality is the core of who you are and what you do in your life and how that affects. I saw this amazing TV show a few years ago. It was a documentary film about a brother and a sister who grew up under the worst conditions you can think about. You know, parents, heroin addicts and criminals and things like that. And the person that interviewed these two children, they separated them, and they were now, I think, in their teens or like, you know, early, at least adulthood. And then they said to the girl who'd become a doctor, she'd, you know, done medicine, no student loans, you know, worked her ass off, you know, to get there. And they said, but, you know, how did this happen? She said, but what do you think with parents like this? Of course, I had to break the cycle to do that. Then they interviewed her brother. He was, you know, 5-time felony, you know, sitting in all sort of the worst prisons that you can in Sweden, etc. Also fully sort of addict, etc. And he said exactly the same. So they had the exact same wording on the exact same experience, but with two different outcomes. What do you think with parents like this?
And why do you think, what was the difference between those two people?
No, but that's one thing, that even though you have exactly the same upbringing, you have exactly the same conditions around you, there is something of an internal guidance and a compass as well. And I think that the power of man and will is super strong to break those cycles. And I, of course, done exactly the same with my family. I was even afraid of having my son being nurtured by my mother when he was a child. I said, you know, it's fine, but never alone. And now she's the best grandmother she can be to my son. So things can change and you can work, and there's a lot of active decision.
Wow. So your mother has even been reformed also.
I think so. I think she's learned a lot from that experience, and that made her think about it and question it, etc. And I think there's lots happening. I think we all can grow and evolve. But I think it starts with knowledge and starts with understanding. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't had that conversation with her.
I think that's so interesting because I think fundamentally, I think our society today and our school and our families and our jobs are a little bit trauma generating machines, right? And I think, so we all have traumas in a way, and I think it's impossible to grow up without traumas, but I think people get a few times during their life, usually when a crisis happens, to take, you know, either it's like the Matrix, you take the blue pill or you take the red pill, right? Either you go on sleeping or you kind of take the chance to evolve, right? And I think there's always a few moments like that in a person's life. And it's often a crisis or something that happens. Like in your mother's case, you coming and saying, making this thing about, that was a gift to her.
I think so. But it was more important for me as part of my journey to move over there than sort of giving her a gift, at least at the time. I can see now the positive effects of it. Being open, daring to take that conversation and sort of learning from things. Because I think either you have a growth mindset where you actually think that you're able to do changes. I mean, we're so programmed and it's in our roots and our DNAs, and we work from experience. But I think that trying to stay open-minded and sort of wanting to change and do things for the better. And I think that's been one of my guiding principles, is like every day a little bit better, just a little bit better, you know, whatever it is that you do, small steps, and that will have a profound impact on the totality of things that you do.
And what is your motivation? I mean, and how has that evolved during your life? I mean, what has motivated you? I mean, you've been extremely successful and created.
But for me, when I was young, it was more like trying to do a little bit better, you know, trying to move out of that situation, trying to create a better for myself and get a sort of a, both, you know, financially a better, you know, platform and situation, but also to have able to do your positive life choices yourself rather than having that being controlled by others. So that's been a big motivation. The other thing which I burn for is, of course, is sort of building company and doing value in that sense, because it's the greatest, you know, gift you can when you hire and employ someone that gets to be part of that, and they, you become affected of something that you do. I think that's amazing. So those have been sort of two things, and then just being a good friend. That's a third thing that I think is really, really important. Trying to be there for people that need you and support them, and try to be a good person.
Exactly. I mean, so I had another guest here, Fabian Bolin. We talked a lot about kind of motivation, and it's often that you have your good motivation and you have shadow motivation, right? And in my case, it was I've always wanted kind of recognition, to allow people to think I'm a great person and great guy, and then I had some other motivations, which is helping the environment and kind of and wanting to be a catalyst to make capitalism good and everything. So and I think it's an interesting concept that you're the most powerful when you can tap into both of these, because you can go the shadow path, and you can go the light, kind of but you will come to the same place, right?
Full circle.
Full circle. So what would you say? What were your kind of light motivations, or what were your shadow, and how did that evolve during?
I think when I was very young, it was more financially driven. How can I create a better sort of conditions around me than what I had when I grew up? But then after that, it became much more sort of take care of your family and sort of build companies where you can affect and support and help others. So I've been sort of seeing that progressing over time, and now it becomes even more things. What can you do for future generations? What can you do in terms of impact to support others? Then it becomes less of self, less of financial, more of we, and more of sort of other things. That's how I see my own path sort of growing.
When did you start becoming more at service, and at what age did that kind of happen?
No, but I think that sort of shift came around becoming a father, and
already that.
Absolutely, absolutely, wow. So from there on, and then of course it's matured, and then first when I stopped working for someone and creating my own companies and working as an entrepreneur, I think that sort of accelerated sort of in that sense. And I think also we have this amazing platform, what we do here with Epicenter and Elements, and you meet so many people, and it's like going to university every day, because you get to meet the most exciting people, and you also hear about their industries and what they do. And that has sort of also helped me excel, that sort of understanding the power of we into that rather than the power of I.
And how, because we talked about it a little bit earlier, but the Epicenter, so for the people that don't know, it's kind of a co-working space. And
more,
you can.
Sure. I'll just give it 2 second round. It's like a digital innovation house. So what we try to do is to help digital scale-up companies. So these really high, fast-growing companies, create the best conditions for them to keep on growing. And traditionally, they were, of course, stuck then. How do I handle real estate around that? How do I raise capital? How do I find talent? And we try to facilitate and support them with that. And the other thing we do is to help these large, big corporates that are often going through transition. How can we work differently? How can we speed up innovation? And how can we create sort of closer connection and bonds to these very successful scale-up companies? So we do that with a team. We do that here in Stockholm. We do it in Oslo, and we do it in Helsinki. And very soon, hopefully, sort of more exciting cities in Europe. So it's a fantastic community of really sort of exciting companies and people.
And how did you get the idea to start the Epicenter? How did that come about?
It's funny because sometimes people have like a very sort of straight mindset. I'm going to start this company here. I really see a problem. But it was for me and my partner Ola that I've been working with Epicenter since we founded. We met this real estate company, or AMF Fastigheter, which is the owner of the property. They were at the time then sort of revitalizing the whole city block around Gallerian of Stockholm. So they made a project there called Urban Escape. And they knew that we had been working with scale-up companies for a long time, and that we were running the SIME digital conference series. So he called us up and said, look, we have this huge project in the city of Stockholm. Would you mind, with your experience, just from not coming from real estate, have a look at this and see what we can do? So we basically first started out as consultants, thinking about what do we do about real estate. But then speaking to people, then we identify this fantastic gap and potential in the market.
But because that was quite early, it was before WeWork, you know.
Yeah, this was back in actually we started developing in 2014 and we opened our first venue in 2015.
Wow, so that was...
So we're turning 10 years next year.
Yeah, that's quite an... For a co-working, the co-working thing has really exploded since then.
For sure, yeah.
So, no, but it's a fantastic space. I was up there just... and we're sitting in another called Elements, right?
Exactly, so now what has happened...
Which kind of sounds a bit spiritual because it has earth, wind and fire.
Yeah, no, but absolutely. I think what we have sort of looked and came to realize is that looking at real estate property and looking into cities is that before retail had a fundamental effect on sort of driving value for people to be in cities. But post-pandemic and the way that retail is shifting where people are buying things online, there's a whole different way of using cities as it is right now. And when we look at these big empty office buildings that are happening more and more and sort of retail going away, how do we turn this around to make Stockholm and other cities an interesting place to be? And then we started thinking about what if we build something we call like a ground floor strategy so that every building should deserve its tenants and its visitors to come there. How do we fill it with excitement that makes it something different than just a traditional office building? And then we started looking at what is Stockholm good at. We have, the impact capital of the world, and there's a lot of talk about sustainability, etc. And then we said, why don't we build a building that focuses on solving some of the biggest challenges and problems to create, the best city of Stockholm, in the future, where sustainability is really the umbrella around that. But that's in terms of how we work. It's about the food we produce and eat. It's about the energy we consume. It's about the water we use, etc. And when the old Greeks built the old foundations, they were talking about 4 elements to build that. And we said, well, we have those 4 basic elements, but there's also a lot of other elements that you need to build a fundamental sort of prosperous city for future generations to live off. Now you have AI to consider, you have health and food tech and all of other things. And we want to gather those initiatives here so that people can learn and then can collaborate around those.
Oh, interesting. That's really interesting. I mean, I think it's really interesting because I think I started quite early with sustainability. I started one of the first sustainability investment funds in 2007. And I kind of always thought that capitalism would save the world, right? And my grand vision was that I would... And I had a little bit of a messiah's complex back then, but it was to save the world through capitalism, right? But I'm more and more come to believe that we need, kind of a shift in consciousness, and I said that earlier on this, but we know how to solve climate change, right? And we have the money to do it, but we're not doing it, right? So, and that's why I also thought it was interesting with the elements. It seems like there is also a tribal and spiritual component in it.
Absolutely.
So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure, happy to do that because we believe that a lot of the future things needs to be tackled through working in clusters. We think that doing things completely individual in silos or in isolation is very difficult. And if you look at innovation in any type of area, I think about 80% of that innovation in an industry is common. And it's about the last 20% on how you productify that and how you tailor that for your needs. But why do we then compete on all the investments on the first 80%? So if we, for instance, work in AI or we work in retail or we work in real estate, wouldn't it be better as a group, as a standard, that we share some of those developments between each other, both sort of resources, but also competence and know-how? And therefore the better of the good sort of lift the whole industry. So we believe in that sort of cluster way of thinking. So we have clusters around AI, we have food tech, we have real estate, we have longevity, and all those initiatives will be harbored here at Elements.
Yeah, and I also like, because I myself come from the startup world, right? And I see myself as an entrepreneur first and foremost, but I think there's a lot of glorification of how good it is to be in a startup. Most of my time in a startup was like I was miserable, right? Because I was like always fighting to get stuff, and it's like there was like misery with short moments of glory and kind of thing, and that's like, how can we? But startups are so important. How can we have a way where people and apparently I saw that 50% of founders of startups have experienced mental problems. 50%.
It's hard work.
So, I mean, how can we create something where it's fun to be a founder? I mean, because let's be honest, I mean, it's a part, I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's also funny. I've been thinking about it as well. Is that there's been a gigantic startup hype, and everyone's a founder, and everyone doing things, and not everyone will be successful. And it's like on the flip side of the coin that you have all of this passion, and you really want to do that. But if you're successful or not, is something that's very decisive, and that can change everything. Because if you're successful and things are going well, yeah, then it's the best job in the world that you can have. You control your own time, and you work with people that are extremely motivated, and you sort of build value. If it's not working, it's probably one of the worst jobs that you can have.
100%,
with constant stress, with all sorts of things being changed by everybody, and not being able to relax. So it's really like a coin flip in sort of many cases. But I think that what has happened is that at least the avenue and the safety net and the way that entrepreneurs are looked upon these days is a lot better than it was 20 years ago. Because if you failed at the time, it was very, very difficult to make a comeback in that sense. Now it's a lot easier. And if you look at that from an American perspective, then it's that, oh, that's great, you failed, on to the next. We're not really there yet, I think, here in Sweden, but we're getting there.
Yeah, but it's a lot of pressure, and I think it's a lot. The pressure is a lot from the VCs as well, right?
Of course.
And I think, being a founder it's a tough proposition, really. And a lot of people go into like you said, it's like a lot of people wanting to be rock stars or movie stars, and then only a few
that will succeed, of course. But I think also being an entrepreneur is not really a job in that sense. It's a calling. You see a problem, you see an opportunity, you go after it. It's hard to educate yourself as an entrepreneur as such, because.
But I'm wondering, is there some way we can do that without having all the worry and it seems like. I'm just exploring that.
Sure.
Because I thought it was so nice you that create this environment for entrepreneurs. Is how can we somehow do something to make them feel more secure, that it's
I think psychological safety is important in any organization,
psychological
right?
safety.
How can you create that sort of in the best ways? How do we create the terms? And I think that from a political standpoint and governmental standpoint, where you have, unemployment support and you have all of that things, I think a lot of those things are there. I think the difficulty becomes when, of course, you spend other people's money and you want to do something and things are maybe not. So I think being part of networks, angel networks, or being part of other entrepreneurial networks, being able to speak, get sort of a mentor that's already there, that's done the journey before you, and try to associate yourself with others that have done the journey. I think those would be a few of my sort of tips, at least, to offload a little bit of that pressure.
What I was thinking actually was that, what if you create, because what these people, the entrepreneur is the most lonely thing in the world, right? Mm-hmm. You're lonely there, because especially when things are going bad, then you have your investors on your throat, and you have your employees looking at LinkedIn, updating LinkedIn profiles,
and your family calling every day.
Exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
But I think, is there any way of creating a tribe for them, where also, and I was thinking, a space where they can be vulnerable together, right, with other entrepreneurs in the same situation. That I think would be magic.
I think what's cool is that I said to you before we started sort of recording, is that in 2015 or something like that, 2016, I went to this mindfulness course together with some friends that I started at. And the only thing they'd done, they would only gather other entrepreneurs. So we were a whole bunch of people together going through this experience together.
Okay, wow.
For sort of the basic training course and then the advanced course. And we were maybe 20 people all having exactly the same experience. And that was a fantastic way by creating that sort of informal avenue, but then also working with these type of questions together. That was very, very helpful. And that created a lot of, life, relationships, even past that sort of training course, etc. So I'm sure just by spending time with more people that are going through the same thing, I think there's tons of learnings and support to get out of it, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's a really good idea to do something like that, because it's really lonely. I mean, I know from from myself and you.
Yeah, I'm lucky. I've always had co-founders, so we're at least a few that sort of can share the load. And I think that when people come to me and ask for advice, the first thing I always ask is, then who's your partner in this? You know, because it is a hell of a lot easier when you're two, when you can drag, or 2 to 3, etc. That at least being 100% alone is I think is one level up for sure.
Yeah, no. I actually also had co-founders in most of my ventures as well, but it's still you're still a little bit. And I guess that's the human experience anyway. You're always alone with your pain. In
Sure,
one way.
sure.
But no, thank you so much for being here on the podcast. And it was really interesting to hear your journey and how you translated those traumas to something to the man you are today. So thank you so much for coming to Cash and Soul.
Thanks, a pleasure.